Hello and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host Bryan. We're going to finish up this week's theme of unlikely features with a really interesting track. I was kind of hoping we'd get to it. We have Henryk Górecki as a composer. We're going to be listening to the third and final movement of Symphony No. 3 titled Symphony of Sorrowful Songs. What's interesting here is the vocalist on here is Beth Gibbons from Portishead fame. How Beth got picked to sing a soprano part for a classical piece written by a Polish composer, I have no idea. I mean, let me look this up real quick. I probably should have done this earlier. Is Portishead though? Yeah, they're English. So I was gonna say maybe if she was from Poland, maybe that would kind of go together. But no. So I don't know how this happened. um, but I'm really intrigued by it. On conducting duty, we have Penderecki, which we've actually checked out previously on the channel when we did the track Threnody for the Victims of Hiroshima. So that was kind of it's kind of neat to see all of this coming together. We've never had Górecki on the channel before, but we have had the other two people who are part of this production here. Now this movement is called Lento Cantabile-semplice. Lento gives us basically our tempo. Lento is very slow. We're looking at something between like 40ish to 60ish BPM. We're definitely in funeral doom territory for the metalheads out there. Cantabile-semplice. Cantabile means it's song-like or singable. Basically, music that is cantabile is where the instruments are trying to emulate the spoken voice or the sung voice, the human voice. And semplice just means simple. So this is going to be a slower track that is going to be on the simpler side, probably not harmonically. There's going to most likely be some depth and complexity to it, but it's going to be simple to perform on an individual level. None of the instruments are going to have complex or intricate or technical sections, generally speaking. And cantabile, like I said, it means that a lot of it is going to be emulating singing. So we got a little bit of a Italian lesson right there. Oh, let me fix this. All right, we're going to dive into this, though. We got Beth Gibbons, we got Penderecki, we got Górecki all working together. Let's see what they're going to give us with the third movement of the Symphony of Sorrowful Songs. There's our tempo. Even I'm rushing. I'm so bad at conducting slower tempos. Flute's playing the exact same line as the vocals. Same notes even, so we're getting texture harmony there. They're really just sitting in this. There's a heavy weight. And the piano adds so much tension. The audio and the video are just out of sync, and it's a little annoying to watch the video. I've got to look away from it. It's really interesting. Beth chooses these specific syllables to rush and hit before the band plays the same note. It's not all the time, but there's a few notes here and there. Oh ho 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 ho. Y'all hear that swell? We were going towards the direction of release. We never got there though. Now we return to this tenser side of the coin. Oh, nice. Oh. Why? There we go. Oh, we're still going though again. Oh. Well, that's not fair. Okay. Um. Dang. Watering my eyes up. Oh. Interesting track. I'm sure some of you were wondering. We were almost done. There are only a few minutes left of the song, and I started chuckling. And it's not a funny song by any means. It's not really a fun song by any means. This is fairly serious. It's got a lot of heavy weight to it. It's got some sorrow baked into a lot of it. And so you're probably wondering, hey, why is this dude laughing? They were showing the faces of some of the musicians, and some of them looked so bored. And this had just come right after the part where they were playing the same note over and over and over and over and over and over and over. And we had made it back to our A section, where now we were playing two notes, bouncing back and forth between them. And it dawned on me, I was thinking, dang, this is probably really boring to play. You know, nothing against what the song is doing, the atmosphere it crafts. We'll get into all that in a bit. But on a purely musician level, sitting in a chair, worrying about your individual part, reading a sheet music, and playing two notes for 15 minutes. Actually, not even, because part of that, our B section, is playing one note, and that's a good 5 or 6 minutes of the song. And so the entire process is counting. Every bar is the same. You have 60 to 80 bars of this one idea, and you need to keep track of where you are. The whole thing is an exercise in bar counting as far as a purely performance angle on this. And it is probably exceptionally boring to play. And I could kind of see it on these people's faces. It's very different from when we look at a more technical piece and you can see the focus and concentration on these people's faces. And this, they're just like, I remember one dude was kind of looking everywhere. You could see his eyes. There's like a little bit of sheet music, a little bit of the guy next to him, a little bit looking at the lights above the stage. And it's just like there's nothing else really to do than count and activate the muscle memory of just back and forth and back and forth. So I started to chuckle because it wasn't just one person. It was like every time the camera panned, there was at least one person in the shot who was just, they looked like they were completely done with this. Mind off, on autopilot, somewhere else entirely. And that's probably not the case. There's a lot of concentration that still goes into this. There's the nuances that we'll talk about in a little bit. There's the whole counting aspect. I mean, if you lose count, there is no landmarks here that are going to help you get back in line outside of whispering to you, but hey, where are we? He's like, oh, we're on the 40th repetition of this. Oh, 40, okay, thanks. Only 60 more to go. um so it's kind of comical for me as somebody who's been in this situation. Not playing for a big symphony like this, but playing classical music where um my part has not been exceptionally intricate. And it's more of just understanding that you're a gear in the larger mechanism of the song, and that there's bigger things at play, but that my part specifically is just not that interesting, not that fun to play. It's not difficult, doesn't really push me, and so you just kind of get into that semi-bored zone where you don't ever hit the moment where you're like completely out of it, but you don't ever hit that alpha, that Zen state either, where you're really all focused on a singular task. And I could just see it, and I'm like, I've been there, and I was just empathizing with some of these people, or at least what I perceived from. I might be injecting some of my own bias into their faces as well, reading into it. But anyways, that's why I was chuckling. If you were worried about me, I suppose. Why is this guy laughing at this sad song? All right, so definitely a simple track. Definitely song-like. I had mentioned earlier on that we would hear stuff that was mimicking the human voice and that the song would be simpler. That's what the name of the song gave away. I was not expecting it to be that on the nose. So many of the instruments are doing the exact same thing our vocals are doing, and if they're not, as I mentioned, they're just playing a couple of notes. It's a very slow tempo, and for the most part, we're working with half notes and whole notes, which in 4/4 take up half of a bar for a half note and all of the bar for a whole note. And it is just it, it's very simple, and everything perfectly not only mimics or emulates but plays the exact same line our vocalist is playing. So very on the nose with that title. I was expecting a little bit more complexity to it all, but the complexity comes in other areas. So the title, perfectly crafted. This is one of those songs where you listen to the title and you know exactly what you're in store for, which would have fit really well a couple weeks back when we had that theme. Now, I mentioned that while musically it is simple, there's a lot of complexity in the nuance. And that's pretty typical for classical music. As I've stated a few times on the channel, with classical music, playing the right notes is only half of the game. The other half is playing those correct notes correctly. And so we can hear a lot of that here. Specifically, if we just look at that swell in our B section where they play with this one note and you get that ah, 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 ah. It's interesting because as I listened to it, it kind of made me think of electronic music, especially with the way that we saw a lot of in the 2010s, where the electronic music doesn't come in on the beat, on the attack. We kind of have a silent attack and then a quick fade into the note. And it kind of has this inverse feeling where usually we're loud and heavy on the beat and the note fades out after that. We have the tail end of it. And we saw a lot of this throughout the 2010s where we kind of have like the beat feels like it swells into the sound. And I felt a lot of that here. This pulsing is something that electronic music does really well because it takes a lot of effort and concentration to do it acoustically, but it's just messing with curves and sliders on with digital music. It's a lot easier to do to get this effect. It's a lot easier to get this effect digitally. To hear it over and over and over and over, there's probably supposed to be a trance-like element to it, possibly. The whole section stands in stark contrast to our A section, which we'll talk about the emotional aspect of that in a little bit. But I never really got into a trance mode because I was really hyper-focusing on listening to it, imagining how you would have to go about playing it, listening to the variances in peaks, visually looking at the performers and how they were going about doing it, how they were getting this swell. Because there's something else interesting about this. Well, we'll talk about that in a second. There's classical music, man. You can't shut me up with this stuff. You give me a 5-minute piece and I'll make a 90-minute video out of it. All right, so the swell, though, it's really difficult to do because it's a lot of minute muscle memory. With strings, I don't exactly know what goes into it. I have played a violin once in my life. It's such a tough time making a sound out of it. It's a tough instrument. I put it past the French horn, which as a brass player, I had problems playing the French horn. The embouchure required for the French horn, the size of the mouthpiece, everything's just very odd for me. So while I could pick up almost any brass instrument, the French horn gave me a lot of troubles, and this gave me even more than that. Oh, you know what? Another good one would be the saxophone, and any reeded. And I've tried to play the saxophone. I can't make a sound out of a reeded instrument. I don't know. It makes no sense to me. My sister tried to teach me so many times. She's played tenor. She's played alto. Just I can't do it. um, but yeah, violin is just it's beyond. I barely made any sound at all. At least with the saxophone, I could make some squeaks out of it. I would like to own a violin though and actually give it an honest shot. This was like my buddy had one. I was like, hey, can I try it out? And like had like 5 minutes of messing with it, a little bit of direction from him, but yeah. So like I don't know the intricacies of how it goes, but as a horn player, I know a lot of it is muscle memory of the diaphragm and air pressure, air control, and really focusing on your entire respiratory system to subtly increase air pressure enough to give you extra volume without actually changing the sound at all. And I'm sure there's some sort of analog to bow playing as well. Because I do pick playing on a string, but that's different from using a bow. But yeah, it's so many like micro muscle memories that you got to keep engaging over and over. One swell is not that big of a deal. 5 swells, not that big of a deal, but to do it over and over and over with the same intensity, even to get to that same height, to bring it back down, to stop, to hit that same volume, bring it back up, bring it back down, stop, same volume. It's very robotic. It's not a hyper precise idea. And like I said, I was listening to the peaks of the volumes and stuff like that, any variances in the repetition, and there are many. But the purpose here isn't for robotic precision. Again, that's where digital music really shines. This is just to get that general sound, and like I said, to kind of create a trance-like element, I think, where the music doesn't really change much, but there's enough of a change. We have that volume rise and fall. That kind of gives it this nice flow without actually changing. But where I think that it was supposed to be inducing some sort of trance-like state, all I was doing was focusing on how they were accomplishing it and looking at the nuances of it. It is not an easy task to do. This is not a technical display, but it is a technical display. You're not going to look at any of these people and say, dang, that took a lot of skill to pull off. It's more of a hidden idea where if you know how difficult this is. And if you don't know, then it looks entirely simple. But the sheer endurance for all of this and the precision, like I said, it's not perfectly precise, but there is still a lot of precision that goes into it. Of just playing the same couple of notes throughout an entire track and perfecting the nuances of them, the swells, the releases, the attacks. This is not an easy piece to perform properly. I want to add that. I think anybody could get up here and just play a note over and over and over. But to play this piece as it was intended for the full 15-ish minutes, that's an endeavor. It really is. And as simple as this piece sounds, this entire symphony deserves the standing ovation they got. Not just for Górecki's composition, which was stellar, but for their performance of it, which is just... This is just a grueling endurance track right here. And it doesn't seem like it, but it is. Now, I had started to go in on trumpet playing and how you would create swells with that. And something I noticed in this song is actually not what's there, but what isn't there. We start off with some strings, and then the vocals, and then the flute section, and that's it. Now, I don't have a real clear shot of every instrument in this symphony. Oh, the piano was in there too, and then we got the harp at the end, but there is definitely a brass section in the back. I saw trumpets, I saw a trombone. I'm going to assume there are more, but for some reason I only saw one trombone. I don't know if there's more woodwinds. Saw the flutes. I didn't see clarinets. I didn't see saxophones. It doesn't mean they're not there. I might just have missed them. But basically, we don't have brass in here. But there are brass on stage. So, the other two movements of this symphony utilize them. And this song doesn't. And like I said, it's important to look at exclusion. This is something that we don't get to look at too much with rock, metal, pop, hip hop. Basically, a lot of the mainstream stuff is that everybody who's present plays. There are odd occasions, like what is that? I always forget that track's name. Between the Buried and Me, though. I think it has something to do with colors, chromatic elite or something like that. I'm gonna laugh when you guys tell me what it is. And I'm like, chromatic elite, where did I even get that from? But they like broke halfway through the song to get off their metal instruments and play xylophones and stuff. But that's pretty rare in rock and metal to exclude instruments at specific portions of a song or even an album. And here we see an entire 15-minute track. I don't know how long movements 1 or 2 are. I wish I did. I wish somewhere I had this pulled up. Oh, maybe. No, there's... No, I don't. Oh, wait, so the first one is 27 minutes in length, the second one is 9, and the third one is, as we saw, 15 to 17. They're all approximations, by the way, because every conductor is going to conduct differently, which is something I've talked about recently, actually, about the difference between writing and playing your own music, like metal does, where it's the same every time, and then writing music and handing it off to composers and musicians to play who might have different interpretations of things. They might change tempo. This is lento. There isn't a tempo to it. Lento is a general vibe of, like I said, 40 to 60-ish BPM. If you play it at 40 strictly, or if you play it at 60 strictly, you're going to have different run times. And even there at the end, when we began to see the slowing down of the song, how far you slow it down, how long you stay in these slower sections. I think at one point we had a fermata, and it's up to the conductor to choose how long you stay in the fermata. And a fermata is just allowing a beat to extend out. So if you have a fermata over beat 4, it would go 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. Whenever the conductor's ready to bring in 1, they can. And that fermata can be as long as they want. So there's a lot of interpretation that goes into classical music, unless your composer is also the conductor. And we don't see that in mainstream music either. So it's really interesting here to see it's approximately 17-minute song. It's approximately a 24-minute song. At first I was like, what does that mean approximately? But then it clicked. I was like, oh yeah, that makes sense. That makes perfect sense. Let me tell them about it, because it's a really neat detail about classical music. That's my brain in a nutshell. So yeah, this is... So let me make like 35, 50... About a 50-minute symphony. And then it's just 15 minutes, so about a third of it, give or take. And they don't use, what, half the band, half the symphony. That's pretty impressive. They don't bring them in at all. So like that makes me think. I got to get back on this. Why were they excluded? What is it specifically about these tones that Górecki didn't want to bring into this? It's not that these instruments can't be sorrowful. They can't bring, sad sounds or anything like that. Of course they can. I mean, it's called Symphony of Sorrowful Songs. I'm going to assume that the other two movements are just as, deep into that sadness. I'm trying to think of a better word than that, but I doubt this is the only movement that is aiming in that direction. So the brass exist and play in other sad sections. So what is it specifically about this one? And I think that's a question that I can't really answer without listening to the other two movements. I might go ahead and do that afterwards, since I enjoyed this to an extent. We'll get on the subjective stuff later, I suppose. I keep jumping ahead. There's so much to talk about with this one. Jeez, it's already 40 minutes into the video too. If you're going to stick with me for like the whole hour, I suspect this will be here. Thank you. I really appreciate it. But, that's one of the important things to look for, especially when you're listening to classical in its entirety. Like I said, it would make more sense with the other two movements as well, but look for exclusion more so than inclusion. A lot of metal stuff we look at and we'll say, this is a metal band with strings. This is a metal band with operatic vocals. This is a metal band with a harp. It's always about what's being included into the bass. But classical is usually about subtraction. What isn't present here? And why do you think that they didn't include them? And for specific sections, it's usually pretty easy to find out. They want to bring the song down, you kind of get rid of the brass. Or you want to start from a bass line sound, you get rid of all your higher instruments. You stick with your bass instruments and baritone instruments. But this doesn't work so well without the additional context. I don't know why the brass aren't here, but it's very clear they're not. They don't play a single note, I don't think. Uh, Easy paycheck for the brass section. I wonder if the rest of the movements were more difficult, especially for some of the brass work. This feels more like a break for them, a chance to recoup. Maybe they had an exceptionally difficult second movement. It's difficult to talk about this without bringing up Beth Gibbons and her vocal work. She's a much better vocalist than I remember. When we checked out Portishead, we checked out had star in its name, didn't it? Burning Star, Shooting Star, Wandering Star. That's what it was. And I did not get the impression that she could sing like this, and that's probably just because Portishead didn't, or at least the song we listened to didn't require it. Not every song needs to showcase the extent of everyone's skills. But this was exceptionally deep and emotive. The vibrato, I think, is what sells me on a lot of this. It is a very wide vibrato, but also very quick. So by wide, a vibrato is a changing of pitch. You make it sharp and you bring it back to neutral, and then flat, you bring it back to neutral. You don't always have to go above and below like that. You can just go sharp to neutral, but it's a wavering of pitch, right? You're forcing your note out of tune and bringing it back in tune to create a wave. And so when I say wide, the difference between the lowest note and the highest note, wide vibratos are going to be wow, 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 wow. I'm not a singer, that's a bad vibrato, but I hope you get the idea with it. And a shorter one would have, less space between the high and the low notes. And then, of course, speed is going to be wow, 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 wow versus whoa, 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 whoa. Again, I'm not a singer. That's a terrible execution of vibrato, but the idea gets across. And so hers is on the faster side, I would say, of movement, but wider than I would expect. And that takes a lot of skill, at least in my head. To me, it makes more sense to, if you're going to go faster, to have less space, to have to cover less ground, right? But she doesn't. She really leans into these wide, fast vibratos, and it's interesting how much tension it adds to the track, which we'll talk about the atmosphere next, I think, is coming up. But she adds a lot of tension because the width of the vibrato also adds more distance between the home note and the strings and the flutes that are playing the exact same line as her don't have vibrato. So they're staying on the home note. So as she gets further away from it, there's more tension being present here. It's an interesting decision. Vibrato is usually a solo instrument idea. And that is because if you get out of tune with your bass note and someone's harmonizing with you, you're going to introduce dissonance, intonation issues. You're out of tune with the note that they're harmonizing with. Or in this case, you're out of tune with the note that the other people are playing. It's the same exact note as the one you started on. And so you introduce tension through the vibrato. But it was obviously intentionally done here. They created two notes and had one person get a little sharper, and then come back down and get a little sharper. And every time they get a little sharper, they're introducing that tension to it, that dissonance. And so dissonance is a huge key to our lead melody line. And it's all thanks to the width and speed of her vibrato. It allows the dissonance to sort of move in and out at a decent pace, but have that extra kick of dissonance through it. It's a fantastic interpretation of it. I'm curious. I saw that this was performed by quite a few different people. I know I saw the list here. There we go. The first performance was in 82. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. This is the 19th performance of it. It was done in 2019. So there has been a ton of vocalists on it. Most of them are all different. The first three performances all had a single vocalist. Performances 5 through 7 had a single vocalist. I can't pronounce either of their names because they're in Polish and I'm going to butcher them without having Google Translate help me with it first. But then after that, it looks like every performance had a different vocalist, and it makes me curious to, or makes me want to listen to a few of them at least and see how other composers and vocalists interpreted it. Oh, that's actually interesting too. Despite vocalists sticking around for multiple performances, even years apart, our first three performances all had the same vocalist. It was 82, 85, and 87. But we have never had a conductor conduct it twice. Interesting. But yeah. And see, that would be cool too. Look at the same vocalist with three different conductors and how the performance might change there. So many little nuances that I'm just really curious to dig into. But I really like what Beth brought to the table here. Regardless of what anybody else has done, maybe she's doing exactly the same thing that a lot of the other vocalists have been instructed to do. But regardless of that, her performance here works really well because of the added tension that she brings to the table. And like I said, it's just so emotive. You can really feel her connect with it, which I thought was interesting. The very top comment on the video says, just want to add that the lyrics are not sung in contemporary Polish, but in the Silesian dialect. I don't know if I pronounced that correctly, of past centuries. For many Polish people, it's challenging to understand it totally, but Beth delivered it brilliantly. So we have somebody who, I think what I read earlier, Portishead came from London. So she's not Polish. Did she know Polish beforehand? And on top of that, did she know this specific older dialect that nobody uses anymore? And if not, then she learned this dialect and connected with the English lyrics enough to deliver this heart-wrenching performance in a language she might not even understand. You know, this might be one of those cases where you just memorize the syllabic sequence. You don't necessarily know what you're saying, but you're saying it correctly. That kind of deal. I don't know the situation. Like I said, maybe Beth is extremely fluent in Polish already anyways. But that fascinates me. I'd wager it's not her native language, and she did a fantastic job with it, and it is just so emotive. Even it's not even just the vocal delivery, which is done very well, but when you watch the performance, she physically matches a lot of the pain and anguish of the song as well in her facial expressions. She's really connecting with this. It is just a fantastic performance. So to wrap this up, what is the song doing? What is the song saying? A lot of this song deals in tension. It deals in dissonance. But it doesn't work with it exclusively. Especially in our A section, where we have the two notes that typically go back and forth on the foundation, and then we have the vocal line. And, oh, we still have to do lyrics too, don't we? We have the vocal line and the flutes, sometimes the violins, all on this melody with the vocalist. And this has a movement to it, rises and falls, right? Rises and falls. Pretty typical rises and falls. There's no major jumps or anything like that. It's not like we're down here, then we jump up to this note, and then come down here, then go way down here, and then come up. It's a pretty standard type of movement through these through the notes. Nice type of pacing to it all. There is harmony within this key melody, but there's also dissonance baked into it, as we already talked about with the vibrato versus the non-vibrato when playing the same line. And then musically underneath, it's not necessarily dissonance, but there's tension throughout. We never really resolve too many chords. We do get a really interesting mode change, key change, maybe even, going into our B section. And it does introduce a bit of resolution. But what's interesting is that we get the resolution on the first beat, I think, after our transition. We get a couple of chords that bring us to something that feels rather resolved, and then it dips into tension and then sits there. We just have that one note over and over and over, and it really feels like it wants to go somewhere. It wants to move to something that's less tense, and the composer just never lets it happen. We sit in this section for a long time. Interestingly, the vocals end up coming over it. Again, we get the melody line on top of this new key and on top of this new monolithic sound. It is a simplification of where we were, a mass simplification. Coming out of this, we head back to our tensor A section, and then we go to our outro, which deals in tension and resolution, and we get several resolutions. And as soon as I thought each one was the end of the song, it wasn't, and we actually played that chord again, and then we went to a tense chord, and then we went to a leading chord, and then we stuck on the leading chord, which builds its own tension, because we have the tension, and then we have the chord that tells us we're going to go to the next one, which is where our resolution is. If we follow these directions, we know where we're going to land, but then we just don't. And then we don't, and we're still at this. It's like staring at roadway signs, and it's like, where you want to go is 50 miles this way, and where you don't want to go is like 50 miles that way, and you're like, okay, so I got to go left. And you look back at the sign, you're like, where do I want to go again? Oh yeah, I want to go left, that's right. Wait, where do I want to go again? And that's what felt like we kept having these leading tones that showed us where we should be going for our resolution, and then we just land back on them again. And so that builds tension, because you're like, okay, when are we going? And now you're on the edge of your seat, and you're like, come on, let's go, you could do it. Let's just go left. And they're like, wait, where do we go again? Leading tone, let's bring it back. Lead us somewhere, take us to it. And we don't. And then finally we land on the resolution again. All right, song's over. And then we hit that resolved chord again. I'm like, oh, we're starting all over again. Come on, seriously? And there's this loop, this repetition, until finally we finish the song on a leading tone. And the thing is that up to this point, we have been trained. The leading tone will come back several times, but eventually we will go to where it's pointing. We will resolve it down. And so we get to this leading tone again, and we linger on it. We hold it. The song slows down. We hit it again. We hit it again. We hit it again. And then the conductor puts his arms down, and we don't get that final resolution. And I think it's interesting that as tense and dark and as sorrowful as a lot of the song felt, and the fact that I did intend to engage with it emotionally in a lot of the latter half, because it really didn't change much, it never really clicked with me until we didn't get that resolution, and then I started tearing up. And I don't know what it was about that lack of finality, but it really hit. I can feel it. I'm starting to tear up again. It's choice. It really is. Very choice decision. And the whole lead up to it. I'm not a real big fan of drawn out endings. But I think this one worked. Like I said, part of it was training the listener to set up certain expectations. and then to draw out tension and then to subvert those expectations. A beautiful twist in about 2 minutes, just expertly done in that final section. So that's what the song is. It's pain, it's sorrow, it's tension, it's anxiety, and there's no release from it. That's what I got out of this track. So I do know there are some pretty heavy lyrics in here, something about something being killed, someone being killed, and bad people. But I'm going to dig into the lyrics full right now and see what the song was about lyrically. Yeah, this is a heavy song. It's about a mother crying out uh, about her possibly dead son who could just be missing. In fact, it states very first line, very first two lines, "Where has he gone, my dearest son?" Though her mind immediately goes to perhaps during the uprising the cruel enemy killed him. So there is some sort of some group of people in power that are cruel, as she states. They're kind of abusing their power, and there's an uprising by the people, I would assume, to get them out. And it's possible that her son was part of that uprising. And she goes on to ask, "Why did you kill my son?" She says, "Never again will I have his support. And if I were to cry an entire river odor," which I'm going to assume that is a specific river in Poland, possibly. Maybe it's a major river in Poland. Says, "Even that would not restore my son to life." Says, "He lies in his grave, but I don't know where it is. Perhaps, though, he lies in a rough ditch." Says, "Sing for him, little songbirds, since I can't find him. And little flowers, may you blossom all around, so that my son may sleep happily." So wherever he is, wherever he happens to be buried, may there be flowers around him. And that's the whole song. Her child is missing at a time of war, at a time of violence, and her mind is everywhere about where he could be. Is he missing? Is he dead? Is he buried somewhere? Is he just in a ditch? And the distraught, the pain of that. It's one thing to have to bury your son. It's a one thing to not know if your son is buried. And that's just, yeah, that's heavy. And the ending of the song, not having resolution, applies here as well. She might not ever find out what happened to her son, and she has to live the rest of her life without that knowledge, without that closure. And the song doesn't give the listener closure either. All right, again, if you're here after 60 minutes of this, thank you. I hope this was informative and educational in some way. Those are my thoughts on Górecki's Symphony No. 3, the third movement of it, featuring Beth Gibbons on soprano vocals and Penderecki conducting it. What did you think of this track? Was there anything that stood out to you? Anything you'd like to add on to what I said? Correct me on? Give your own perspective on any of that stuff. Put it down in the comments. Above the comment section is a description box. In there you'll find a link to Linktree. It takes you here. You can find my compositions. You can find ways to support the channel, a link to the Discord server, and so much more. I got a ton of stuff in there. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all three of those. Alright. It's only the first video of the day, and we're already an hour in. If you're watching this live, right, you got here right when it launched at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Then now, both the special selection and right now. The creator requests are both live and available to watch. This is a long one, and again, I thank everyone who's still here. We do have both of those coming up, though. Otherwise, I'll be back tomorrow. We'll have our album review. We're going to do Maybe She Will. It's going to be a short one. I think the album's only like 35 minutes long. So we're probably only looking at a 2.5 hour video for that one. And then no live stream on Sunday. Maybe I don't know. I'm still deciding on that one, I guess. Might be a surprise. I don't know. I'll let everybody know since I've kind of let this out now. If I don't do it, I'll make a post about it. If I do it, it'll be a surprise. It'll happen at 11 a.m. EST, though, on Sundays. So I guess look for a community post around that time or your inbox. Until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic afternoon, morning, or evening whenever you choose to watch my videos. That was weird.